Good day. My name is Pat Halpin, and I'm from the Marine Geospatial Ecology Lab at Duke University. Today, I'm going to speak about the geographic scope of the workshop and the potential scope of the environmental planning at a regional scale to support the Northern Mid-Atlantic Ridge REMP process. So there's two general issues that we're grappling with when we're thinking about the geographic scope. The workshop geographic scope, the spatial extent that we're using for area-based management tools, as well as a broader bioregional scope where we're thinking about cumulative impacts and other kinds of broader functions that might go within and out of the specific area that we're working on for spatial management. So I'm going to focus mainly on this first point here, the specific geographic scope. So the big question that comes up with any of these types of planning meetings is, what is the area we're actually focusing on? And this is very important because it's crucial to be able to define where the workshop experts looked and where they were not looking during the progress of the workshop. And so the real issue is, how do we go from the concept of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge to the specific extent we were working on during the Evora workshop? So some of the questions that came up in discussion in Evora were questions about how wide is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge? How much area should we be focusing on? Where are we really focusing our efforts? And the Mid-Atlantic Ridge could be an extremely wide area if you're thinking about it in a broad context. But we were trying to narrow things down to this more specific area we were working with. And this is a slide borrowed from Phil Weaver, looking at the Lower Bathiel province and thinking about that as a slightly more narrow focus. It's still fairly wide, up to 400 kilometers on either side of the ridge in places, but it does narrow us down to more of the spreading ridge area. So one of the big issues that came up in discussions in Evora was consideration of whether or not we were looking at the sedimented areas on the side slopes, or were we looking mainly at the rocky outcrop areas along the ridge axis. And so really the focus of the workshop focused much more on the ridge axis and also the transverse fracture zones, separating and bifurcating the ridge. So really the general focus of the workshop was really focusing primarily on the exposed active spreading ridge region. And this was the area of most of our focus during the Evora workshop. So just to provide some approximate scales, this is looking at some of the exploration contract areas and then looking at just some scales to look at what 50 kilometers, 100 kilometer, or 200 kilometer widths would look like in comparison to contract areas, and looking at the line that is the approximate ridge access location. As Phil Weaver will be discussing, the adaptive management considerations during the Evora workshop were very focused in on usually around the 20 to 30 kilometer width around the ridge axis. And so 50 kilometers was covering most of the area that they're focusing on for. So at the workshop, it was decided that a wider, slightly wider 100-kilometer buffer on either side of the ridge would cover that ridge axis area and allow some buffering beyond, and provide a 200-kilometer area for the length of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This full extent included two different geographic subregions, one area north of the Azores and a second area south of the Azores. The workshop focused primarily on the area south of the Azores for our consideration. So this is important that we were focusing in on that area south of the Azores down to around the equator and the Romanche fracture zone. So in summary, the workshop focused primarily on a more narrowly defined area centered on the ridge axis and extending out 100 kilometers to include the spreading ridge and exposed low sediment side slopes. It focused on an area between the limits of the Portuguese ECS in the Azores region of approximately 33 degrees north and the Romanche fracture zone to approximately 0 degrees south. Thank you.